The air is heavy, and you're not supposed to be here. Not in this story. Not in these walls. Because what I'm about to reveal was never meant for the public. It was hidden, sealed, and buried beneath centuries of silence. But tonight you're going to hear it, and once you do, there's no turning back. Imagine a convent, stone walls, frostbitten windows, the silence of prayer echoing through corridors. From the outside, it looked holy, pure, untouchable. But behind its doors in the winter of 1847, 17 young women stepped into a darkness so suffocating. Only 3 ever walked out alive, and none of them ever spoke. Not fully, not truthfully. Because what they witnessed, what they became, was not meant for human understanding. This isn't just a forgotten footnote of history. This is something deeper, something that reveals how institutions, those that claim to protect souls, can instead be laboratories of control, sacrifice, and transformation. And when you realize what really happened in the chapel of St. Margaret's, you'll understand why the records were locked away, why whispers of this place were dismissed as rumor, and why even hardened investigators of the church turned pale and begged for silence. The story I'm about to tell isn't entertainment. It isn't folklore. It's dangerous knowledge. If you keep listening, you accept the weight of it, because once these shadows enter your mind, they stay. This isn't a mystery you observe from a distance. This is a decent hand. You're stepping into the abyss with me right now. Before we descend further, pause for a second. If you want to go deeper into stories the world was never supposed to let you hear, then don't just watch in silence, lock in with me. Like this video, share it with someone who still believes the surface version of history, and subscribe because what's coming isn't for casual eyes, it's for those willing to see the rot beneath the marble, the whispers behind the hymns. Now, brace yourself. Because St. Margaret's Convent is not what it appeared to be. Its foundation wasn't. Faith, it was something older, darker. Something carried across oceans by those who believed suffering was the only path to purity. And the young women who entered its walls in 1847 weren't just novices. They were initiates into a system that consumed them, body and soul. And by the time spring arrived, the snow was stained with more than ice and ash. It was stained with secrets that were never supposed to escape. Tonight they do. The novices thought they were entering a sanctuary, a house of God, a place of peace. Instead, they found themselves swallowed by a fortress. 3 stories of limestone quarried from the very hills around them, walls so thick they seemed built to keep something in, not just to keep the world out. Inside, there was no warmth, no softness, only a cold that seeped into bone and soul. Alike, the windows were narrow slits, choking off light, casting the convent into an eternal twilight that bent time and broke spirit. From the moment the young women arrived, their humanity was stripped away, piece by piece. They rose at 4. In the morning, bare feet against frozen stone, shivering in silence as they filed to the chapel by candlelight. No laughter, no conversation, only the sound of their own breathing and the sharp, measured tone of Mother Superior Agatha, woman who ruled like a queen draped in holy robes. She had fled Europe, carrying with her relics, manuscripts, and secrets no one could verify. Her gaze cut through the young sisters, as though she could read not just their thoughts, but the doubts they hadn't yet dared to think. To falter under her eyes was to invite punishment disguised as penance. Meals were not meals, they were weapons. Thin gruel, stale bread, water tinged with bitterness. The nuns were told hunger was a blessing, that pain was purification. Comfort denied was a step toward holiness. But slowly, day by day, the line blurred between purification and breaking. And that was the point. Because control is never about faith, it's about shaping will. Their silence was enforced, their labor endless. Hours of prayer, hours of backbreaking work in gardens buried beneath snow. Hours spent translating manuscripts in languages few of them truly understood. To slip, to laugh, even to question, was weakness. and weakness required correction. Solitary confinement, cold floors, nights on stone instead of beds. Their bodies were being tested, but more importantly, their minds were being molded. Isolation, starvation, sleep deprivation. It's a pattern as old as power itself. Strip away identity, strip away comfort, and a person becomes clay. And in the hands of someone like Mother Agatha, clay could be shaped into anything. Remember this? Institutions don't reveal their true power in rituals of worship. They reveal it in the ways they crush the spirit until obedience feels like survival. St. Margaret's wasn't a convent. It was a crucible. And in that crucible, girls became something else, swore they didn't survive at all. This was the first layer of the descent. And behind the closed doors, in the frozen silence of that Pennsylvania winter, something older than faith was stirring awake. It began quietly, like all things meant to slip past suspicion. At first, the novices thought it was random and accident, of timing, but patterns are never accidents. Always it happened at midnight. Always when the rest of the convent was trapped in the heavy sleep of exhaustion. The door would open, and Mother Agatha would appear, her veil heavy, her presence suffocating. 2 senior sisters flanked her, faces hidden, eyes unreadable. They carried candles that did not burn yellow, but white cold flames that warped the air and twisted shadows into grotesque shapes. A name would be whispered, but that whisper cut through the stone halls like a command from something not human. And the chosen novice would rise. Not in rebellion, not in hesitation. She would follow, barefoot and trembling, down the narrow corridor toward the chapel carved into the belly of the convent itself. The others lay frozen in their beds, pretending not to hear, pretending not to notice, because to speak of it was to risk being chosen next. Sister Catherine, only 21, began to keep count. She scratched marks beneath her bed, recording every midnight procession. By the end of January, 8 had been called. 3 had never returned. The ones who did came back wrong, not visibly, not immediately, but the change was there. Eyes seemed deeper, like pits reflecting light instead of absorbing it. Their voices slowed, words dragging as though pulled from somewhere far away. And then there were the slips fragments of a language no one recognized. Not Latin, not French. Something harsher, older. Sounds that made the hair on the neck rise, because they weren't just words, they were incantations. Sister Elizabeth was the first to change. Once lively, once devoted, she now sat in silence, her gaze fixed on something no one else could see. When asked a question, she nodded or shook her head. But when prayers filled the chapel, her lips moved to different word syllables that bent the ears of those close enough to hear. The others started avoiding her eyes, because when candlelight touched them, they seemed to shimmer, as if alive with something crawling behind them. Catherine was terrified, but she was also intelligent. She began watching, waiting, piecing together fragments of a puzzle no one dared to name. And one night, she found it a warning scratched into stone by trembling hands. Words carved in haste, hidden where only someone scrubbing the chapel floor would ever see them. They are not what they seem. The old ways never died here. Trust no one, especially those who return changed. That was the moment Catherine understood. The rituals weren't tests of devotion. They were something else entirely, something that stripped a person, reshaped them, and returned them as a vessel for a power older than the church itself. And yet, no one outside those walls would ever know. Because the snow kept falling, the doors stayed locked, and the rituals continued. The chapel was not what Catherine expected. She had seen chapels before bright, adorned with stained glass, sanctified by light. But this one was carved directly into the living rock beneath the convent, a cavern more than a sanctuary. The air was damp, heavy, and always cold, even when candles lined the walls in trembling rows. The stone wept moisture, as though the earth itself recoiled from what happened here. At first glance, it was a chapel. But the more Catherine looked, the less Christian it became. The walls were etched with simple spirals that seemed to pull the eye inward, geometric patterns that bent perception, shapes of human figures twisted in ways the mind resisted naming. Mother Agatha told them these were ancient Christian markings, remnants from the catacombs of Rome. But Catherine had been educated by Irish sisters in Philadelphia, women proud of their church history. She knew these symbols did not belong to Christianity. They belonged to something older, something buried because it was never meant to survive. The altar was the worst of it. Not a slab, not a table for a Eucharist. No. It was a hollowed basin in the stone floor itself. Channels carved away into darkness like veins reaching for a hidden heart. The stone was stained, dark patches spreading outward, seeping deep into the porous rock. No amount of scrubbing could erase them. No explanation could make them sacred. Catherine's hand shook when she polished that altar, because she could feel it, not just the texture of the stone, but a vibration. As if something beneath the surface was alive, listening, watching. She tried to convince herself it was only her mind weakened by hunger and fear. But then she saw it. In the cracks near the altar, words scratched in haste, nearly hidden by shadow. Find the hidden room. The truth is written in the stones. The letters were crude, jagged, the initials beneath them. M.A.O. Catherine froze. She knew those letters. Mary Agnes O'Brien, her roommate. The same girl who had been led away weeks before, who had returned, changed. The same girl who no longer remembered carving warnings, who claimed she had slept through nights she had lived awake. In terror, if Mary Agnes had written this, then something inside her still resisted, still reached out for help. That thought chilled Catherine more than the stone beneath her knees, because it meant the transformations weren't complete, weren't permanent, and yet, resistance remained, so did suffering. Catherine realized then that the rituals weren't meant to test faith. They were meant to break identity, to hollow a person out, and then refill them with something else. Something drawn through the altar, through those ancient symbols, through rituals hidden behind chants of devotion. The convent was no longer just a house of silence and prayer. It was a machine and engine designed to strip, consume, and transform. And Catherine was next in line. By February, the snow had buried the convent to its windowsills. No visitors, no letters, no escape. The world outside had forgotten them, more perhaps had been instructed to. Inside, the routines grew sharper, harsher, crueler. Midnight came more often. More names were whispered, or girls vanished into the chapel, into the stone belly of that place, and fewer returned. Those who did were not the same. Catherine counted, always counting. By her marks, 11 novices had been taken by mid-February. Only 6 ever returned. The rest were never seen again. No bodies, no graves, only absence. And absence weighs heavier than death. Those who came back behaved like shadows of their former selves. Sister Elizabeth now sat for hours without moving, her lips trembling in silent phrases that no one recognized. Sister Sarah's laughter, once bright, once forbidden, but alive, was gone. Instead, she moved through the halls with the silent grace of a predator, her steps too measured, her gaze too fixed. And Mary Agnes, Catherine no longer knew if she was friend or stranger. Some nights she would find her roommate staring at the wall for hours, unblinking, her lips cracked, her breath shallow, as if listening to voices only she could hear. Then, without warning, Mary Agnes would collapse into desperate prayer, begging for a God that seemed absent from these halls. When Catherine tried to ask about the warnings she had carved, Mary Agnes looked at her with eyes that shimmered like wet glass and said only, "I never wrote that. I don't remember. Please don't make me remember." Fear became constant. It lived in the walls, in the silence, in the heavy rhythm of bells that marked every hour. The novices no longer spoke to each other except in whispers, glances, fragments. Everyone was waiting for their name to be called, Everyone knew what it meant when it was. Catherine began to notice something else. Those who returned changed, who spoke in strange tongues, who refused food, who grew stronger as others wasted away, were always placed closer to Mother Agatha. They stood by her side during prayers, their eyes lowered, their movements synchronized. They had become extensions of her will, tools. Proof that obedience was not the goal transformation was. The convent was not teaching devotion, it was manufacturing vessels. And each night, as Catherine lay awake, praying silently that her name would not be spoken, she knew the clock was ticking. She would be called. It was only a matter of time. And when it came, she feared there would be no part of her left to resist. It happened in silence. Midnight struck, and the convent's bell groaned against the frozen air. Catherine lay in her narrow bed, pretending to sleep, breath shallow, heart pounding. Then came the sound-soft, deliberate footsteps in the hall. The door opened, and there she was. Mother Agatha, flanked by the two veiled sisters, their faces still hidden, their candles burning with that same unnatural white flame. The whisper cut through the dormitory like a blade. Sister Catherine. Every muscle in her body froze. Her name, Dis, was the moment she had been dreading, marking, praying against. She rose, legs trembling, and stepped barefoot onto the frozen stone. The corridor swallowed her as the others pretended to sleep, though she felt their eyes on her, wide, terrified, begging her not to look back. Down the narrow passage they led her, deeper, deeper into the belly of the convent, until the walls seemed to breathe with moisture and the air grew too heavy to swallow. The chapel opened before her, a cavern carved from living rock, dripping with water, glowing faintly with candlelight that made shadows crawl. At its center stood the altar, hollow basin stained with centuries of offerings that were never meant to be spoken of. The smell was thick, metallic, and wrong. Around it, the changed sisters stood in silence, eyes lowered, lips trembling with whispers in that guttural, ancient tongue. Mother Agatha's voice rose, commanding yet gentle, coaxing yet absolute. Tonight, Catherine, you will be tested. Tonight, you will shed the last of your weakness. Tonight, you will be remade. Catherine wanted to scream, but her body moved against her will, guided by hands that seemed too cold, too strong for human touch. They placed her before the altar. The symbols carved into the walls seemed to writhe, spiraling inward until her vision blurred. She tried to look away but found herself caught, pulled into shapes that were not symbols at all, but instructions, keys, a map to something older than the church, older than prayer. Then came the cup, pressed to her lips by veiled hands, filled with something dark, thicker than water, sharp as iron. Her body resisted, but Mother Agatha's voice whispered into her ear, soothing, commanding, unstoppable. Drink, child, be emptied, be filled. The liquid burned down her throat, searing like fire, coating her insides with a heaviness that did not belong. Her vision fractured. The chapel spun. She saw faces twisted, luminous, wrong. She heard voices, many voices, all speaking through. The changed sisters in unison, chanting words that vibrated through her bones. For a moment, she felt herself slip. Her thoughts frayed, her name fading, her will dissolving like salt in water. And then clarity, a flash. In the corner of her eye, she saw it, a crack in the stone behind the altar, faint but unmistakable. The hidden room Mary Agnes had warned her about. The truth was there, written in the stones. If she survived this night, she had to reach it. But survival meant resisting, if only for a moment longer. And resisting in that place was the most dangerous act of all. The days after the ritual were a blur. Catherine moved like a ghost through the convent, her body heavy, her mind fractured. She could not recall how the night had ended, only that she had awakened in her bed with the taste of iron still clinging. To her tongue, the other novices avoided her eyes. Some pitied her, some feared her, and some those already changed watched her with a hunger that had nothing to do with food. Yet through the fog, one memory cut sharp. the crack in the stone. Behind the altar, the hidden room, the words Mary Agnes had carved. Catherine knew she would not survive another ritual. She did not act now. She would be hollowed like the others. She waited. Days bled into nights until finally she was assigned to clean the chapel alone. Alone, that was her chance. Candlelight flickered as she knelt before the altar, scrubbing at stains that never faded. Every muscle in her body screamed with dread, but she forced herself to move toward the wall. The crack was there, almost invisible beneath the shadows. With trembling fingers, she pressed against it. The stone shifted. A seam revealed itself, a hidden door cut into the rock centuries earlier. With a low groan, the panel slid open, exhaling air so old it carried the weight of centuries. Inside was darkness. A corridor narrow, silent, hungry. Catherine slipped inside, pulling the stone shut behind her. The silence here was different, thicker, alive. Her candle struggled, its flame bending as though pushed by unseen breaths. The corridor opened into a chamber far larger than the chapel itself, carved deep into the mountain's heart. And there, Catherine froze. The walls were not painted, they were carved. Every inch was covered in symbols, spirals, twisted figures, and script so ancient it predated language itself. And she recognized some from the chapel, but here they were raw, unmasked, not imitations. This was no Christian sanctuary. It was a temple, an altar to something the church had buried and renamed, but never destroyed. At the center of the room was a pit, wide, bottomless, its edges lined with bones. Skulls stacked like offerings, hollow eyes staring upward. And above the pit, suspended by chains black with rust, hung a slab of stone an altar that pulsed faintly as if it still breathed. On its surface lay manuscripts, pages so brittle they seemed ready to disintegrate at a touch. Catherine forced herself closer. She scanned the text, eyes wide as she realized what she was holding. It's not scripture, not prayer, instructions, rituals, translations of languages no one should have remembered. Each passage spoke of vessels, of bodies made empty, of souls displaced, of something ancient, something vast, that required flesh to walk the earth again. Catherine dropped the pages, her heart hammering. Then she sought fresh carvings among the old ones. Names, dates, dozens of them, etched with precision. Every novice who had ever entered St. Margaret's. And at the bottom of the list, half finished, waiting for its last stroke, was her own name, Sister Catherine. The chamber had already claimed her. She was next. Her candles sputtered, drowning. In the damp air of the hidden chamber, Catherine pressed her back to the carved wall, heart pounding, breath shallow. She had seen too much. She should have turned away, but the knowledge was burned into her mind. The rituals, the vessels, the list of names, her own etched as if fate itself had already claimed her. She had to leave. She had to warn the others. With shaking hands, she retraced her steps down the narrow corridor, the stone heavy as she pushed the panel back open. But when she slipped into the chapel, she froze. Oh, she was not alone. A dozen sisters stood in the pews, motionless, eyes fixed on her. Their faces were pale, their lips cracked, their eyes shimmering faintly as though something alive crawled behind. Them in silence, they parted, making way for Mother Agatha. She stepped forward, her veil casting her face in shadow, her voice low, steady, sweet like poisoned honey. "Curiosity," she whispered, "is the root of all rebellion, and rebellion must be purged." Catherine's body screamed to run, but her legs barely obeyed. She stumbled backward into the corridor, slamming the stone panel shut just as the sisters surged forward. Fingers scraped the rock, nails clawed like beasts. Voices rose in that guttural tongue. The wall shook, dust raining down as if the mountain itself wanted to release them. Catherine fled deeper into the chamber, candles swinging wildly, shadows, dancing like mockeries of her own body. She knew there was no true escape, only deeper secrets. But then she noticed something. Along the far wall, half buried beneath rubble, was an archway, small, narrow, a passage not yet sealed. She ran for it, her breath ragged, the sound of pounding from behind her growing louder. The archway led to a staircase carved directly into the rock, spiraling downward into suffocating darkness. The air grew hotter as she descended, thick with the smell of iron and earth. Her candle nearly died, but the glow from below guided her a faint, pulsing red light. It was not fire. It was something older, something alive. And as she reached the bottom of the stairs, the sound met her first. A low hum, vibrating through stone, through flesh, through bone. Not a sound made by human voices. A resonance, a presence. Catherine clutched the last stub of her candle, knowing she had passed the point of return. The convent above was no longer a convent. The sisters were no longer human. And below her feet, in the depths of the mountain, something waited to be born. The stairwell ended in a cavern so vast it seemed impossible it could exist beneath the convent. The ceiling arched high above, vanishing into darkness, supported by pillars of stone carved with spirals that seemed to twist as she stared at them. The air pulsed with a heavy vibration, a rhythm that was not a sound but a heartbeat, and it was not hers. The floor sloped downward into a pit, and at its center glowed a mass of red light that was not fire, not flame, but something alive. It pulsed like a vein, thick and slow, bleeding illumination into the cavern. Catherine crept forward, each step heavy, drawn against her will. Her candle died, but it no longer mattered. The glow bathed her in its light, and for the first time, she saw what it truly was. Not a flame, not a vein, a wound. The earth itself was open, raw, seeping with something that should never have been unearthed. And inside that wound was movement. Something vast, coiled, sleeping or pretending to sleep. Its surface was slick, glistening like flesh, etched with symbols that matched those on the chapel walls. And as Catherine watched, the markings shifted, rearranging themselves into words she did not want to understand. She clamped her hands over her ears, but it was not sound. It was thought, ancient thought. Thoughts that pressed against her skull like claws. Words that filled her veins with fire. We are many. We are waiting. You are hollow. You will be filled. Choking, but the cavern had no air. The pillars loomed above, spirals twisting faster, pulling her vision inward. The ground trembled, dust raining from the unseen ceiling, and then she saw them. The missing novices. 11 girls, kneeling in a circle around the pit, heads bowed, bodies swaying as if caught in a trance. Their lips moved in unison, chanting. The same guttural language she had heard in the chapel. Only now she understood fragments. Not words, but meaning. Welcome. Vessel. Birth. Their eyes opened. Every one of them glowed faintly with the same red as the wound. They were not missing. They were here, were part of it. Catherine stumbled, tears streaking her face, the realization tearing through her. The rituals had never been about prayer. They were about preparation. Each novice who survived was a brick in the foundation, each disappearance a sacrifice. Now the foundation was nearly complete. The wound was widening. The thing inside was waking, and Catherine, her name already etched in stone, was next. From the pit, the surface shifted, slowly, trembling, rising. An eye opened, not human, not earthly, vast enough to swallow her whole in its gaze. And Catherine realized that she had not been led here by accident. She'd been summoned, the eye fixed on Catherine, and in its reflection, she saw herself not as she was, but as she would become, hollowed, a vessel, her flesh bent to carry something older than time. She staggered back, but the chanting novices tightened their circle, their swaying rhythm synchronizing with the monstrous heartbeat. The cavern was alive now, trembling with hunger, dust cascading from the ceiling in choking clouds. Catherine screamed, but the sound vanished into the enormity of the chamber, swallowed before it even left her throat. Then Mother Agatha emerged. From the shadows, serene, her veiled attendants at her side. Her voice, calm and commanding, rose above the inhuman rhythm. Do not resist, child. This is the honor for which you were chosen, to be more than mortal, to be more than woman, to be the threshold itself. She reached out a pale hand, and Catherine felt her knees buckle, pulled forward by a force stronger than gravity, stronger than her will. For an instant she thought of her family, her mother's worn hands, her father's laughter before sickness stole it, the dreams she once carried of serving the poor with compassion. But those images faded, burned away in the glare of the pit. All that remained was terror and the impossible urge to know what lay beyond. Her body shook, caught between surrender and revolt, and then clarity. With trembling hands, Catherine reached inside her cloak. The rosary her mother had pressed into her palm the day she left Philadelphia still hung around her neck. She ripped it free, clutching the crucifix until it cut her skin. She whispered words she barely believed would reach anyone. If there is a God, take me now. The cavern screamed, the wound convulsed. The eye recoiled, the chant faltered, and the ground itself shuddered. The veiled attendants shrieked as their faces split into shapes no longer human, unraveling like cloth on fire.
Mother.
Agatha staggered, eyes blazing with rage, her voice suddenly stripped of its calm. You fool, you've undone centuries of preparation. The novices collapsed, writhing, their glow flickering like dying embers. Catherine didn't wait. She ran, through the collapsing cavern, through corridors that twisted on themselves, through shadows that clawed at her skin. Behind her, the pit roared, the sound not of a thing dying but of something denied. The convent shook as if the earth itself wanted to bury what had been awakened. Catherine burst into the snow-choked night, lungs burning, heart racing, never daring to look back. The convent bell tolled once, twice, and then silence. By dawn, St. Margaret's convent stood empty. Windows shattered, walls cracked, the bell tower collapsed into rubble. The official record would say the building was lost to fire, that the sisters perished in a tragic accident. But Catherine's letters told another story. A story of rituals, of wounds in the earth, of something vast and ancient stirring beneath. Holy ground. Though she lived, she never took her vows, never entered another church again. She vanished into obscurity, her warnings ignored, her words buried. Yet the symbols she described, they have been found in other ruins, their lands, other faiths, and even now, they whisper the same promise. We are waiting. So ask yourself, when you pray, when you kneel in silence and beg for answers, do you know who is listening? Or are you, without realizing, opening a door that was never meant to be unlocked? Comment below the phrase, "The eye still watches twice." If you're ready to accept that once you've seen into the pit, you can never go back. Because the truth isn't hidden. It's been here all along, waiting, watching. And now it knows your name.